Keanu sat alone in a quiet room while the lights of the city faded behind the window. The world outside looked alive, but inside his heart everything felt heavy. He had spent months trying to rise again in an industry that once celebrated him, but lately every door felt closed. Every meeting ended with the same cold smile and the same words that broke him a little more. People told him he was not needed now. They said new faces had taken over. They said maybe he should rest for a long time. He listened to them while pretending he did not care, but when he was alone, he felt the weight of every sentence. For the first time in years, he felt like he was fading away. And the worst part was that he did not know how to stop it. He kept replaying the same question in his mind. What if they were right? What if he was no longer good enough? What if all the years of kindness and patience and hard work simply did not matter anymore? He tried to stay calm, but a quiet fear built inside him. It was the fear of being forgotten. The fear of becoming a memory rather than a living part of the world he loved. He had lost projects one after another, and even when he tried to stay hopeful, each rejection felt sharper than the last. People who once supported him now stayed distant. Messages that used to arrive daily now came once in weeks. The industry that once admired his heart had turned away from him, and Keanu felt it in every breath he took. As he sat in the dim room, he wondered what he could still offer. He had always been humble. He had always believed in simple goodness. But now it felt like goodness was not enough to survive. The pressure pressed against his chest until he could barely breathe. He leaned back and closed his eyes. He wished for a single moment of clarity. He wished for one person who would remind him that he was not alone in this long, silent battle. And in that moment, a soft sound broke the silence. A gentle knock came from the door behind him. It was almost too soft to hear, but it pulled him out of his thoughts. He stood slowly and walked toward the door. When he opened it, he saw Sandra standing there. She was holding a small paper cup with warm coffee. She did not smile widely. She simply looked at him with calm worry in her eyes. She studied his face like she already knew the thoughts he had been fighting all day, and he felt something shift inside him. Because Sandra had always been honest with him. She never saw him as a fading star. She never saw him as someone who needed to prove his worth. She always saw him as a human being first, and on days like this that meant more than anything else. Sandra stepped inside without saying a single word. She placed the coffee on the table and then sat down on the couch. She did not make any loud comment or force him to talk. She simply waited. Her presence felt warm and steady. Keanu sat across from her, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The silence was peaceful this time. Then she looked at him and spoke with a soft voice. She said she had heard what happened with his last project. She said people had been unfair to him. And she said something he never expected. She said she was not going to let the world decide his worth. Her words hit him deeply. He tried to look away, but she leaned forward and told him he had more value than any role he lost. She told him he had changed lives quietly for years, and that kind of heart never disappears no matter how loud the world becomes. She told him he would rise again, but this time with even more strength, because now he understood what it felt like to stand at the edge. Her voice filled the room with a steady warmth that lifted the weight inside his chest. For the first time in months, he felt a small spark of hope. But then she surprised him even more. She said she had been working on something. She said she wanted him with her for a new project she was shaping. She said she believed he was perfect for it. Keanu stared at her, not knowing what to say. No one had offered him anything in so long. He felt the truth of her sincerity. She was not offering pity. She was offering respect. She was offering trust. She was offering belief. And that was something he had almost forgotten how to feel. The room felt different now. The shadows seemed to soften. The air felt lighter. Keanu finally spoke and asked her why she was doing this for him. Sandra looked at him with a gentle smile and said something he would remember for the rest of his life. She said she had seen him at his best, and she had seen him at his quietest. She said the world might forget a moment, but she would never forget a good heart. She said she believed in him even when he did not believe in himself. And she said she was not going to let him walk through this dark time alone. As her words reached him, he felt a wave of emotion rise. He did not cry, but his eyes softened. He felt something lift inside him, something that had been asleep for too long. He realized he still had a chance. He realized he still had someone who stood by him when everything else crumbled. Sandra's support did not fix everything, but it gave him a starting point. It gave him strength to breathe again. And in a world that had turned away from him, she became his only light. In that moment, Keanu understood something important. Sometimes life takes everything from you just to show you the value of the people who stay. And Sandra stayed. The next morning arrived slowly, with pale sunlight entering the room. Keanu woke early because his mind refused to stay quiet. He kept replaying the moment Sandra had looked at him with such honesty. Her calm voice stayed in his thoughts, and he felt something he had not felt in a long time. He felt a small sense of direction. He sat at the edge of his bed and took a long breath. He knew he could not change the past, but maybe with Sandra beside him he could change what came next. Still, a part of him was scared. Support felt new again. Trust felt dangerous. He wondered if he could truly rise or if life would push him down again. He walked into the kitchen to make coffee, but his hands were slightly shaky. When he held the warm mug, he realized it was not fear that made him tremble. It was the weight of a second chance. Second chances are strange because they look simple from the outside, but when they finally reach you, you feel the pressure of not wanting to waste them. Keanu knew this feeling well. He had lived many years quietly carrying his grief, his patience, his silent strength. But this time, this struggle was different. This time, he was fighting not only for his career, but for his sense of self. For months, he had felt like a shadow of who he used to be. Now Sandra had given him a light, and he hoped he could follow it. A soft knock came at his door again. When he opened it, Sandra was standing there with a small notebook in her hand. She smiled lightly and said she had come early because she knew he would not rest after their talk. He smiled back, a tired but honest smile. She walked inside and opened her notebook on the table. She told him she had been working on a project that felt close to her heart. She said it was a story about resilience, quiet courage, and the power of staying kind even when life becomes harsh. She looked at him and said she wanted him to play the lead role. The words made him freeze for a moment. He had not heard anything like that in a long time. Keanu slowly sat down as Sandra explained the project. It was small, personal, and deeply emotional. It was not the kind of film that needed bright lights or loud noise. It needed a soul. She said she believed he could bring the character to life in a way no one else could. She spoke with such certainty that it filled the room. Every word she said pushed away the doubt inside his chest. He asked her why she chose him. She looked at him and said the world might forget many things, but she remembered his heart, his honesty, and the way he carried pain without letting it turn him bitter. She said he was the perfect choice because he understood silence. Her words cut through him with honesty and warmth. He leaned back in his chair, unsure what to say at first. He had become used to silence, used to rejection, used to people telling him what he lacked, but Sandra was telling him what he still had, and what he had was something deeper than talent. He had truth. He had authenticity. He had a heart that people trusted. Slowly, he nodded. He told her he would try. She smiled and said trying was enough for today. He felt a small lift inside him. Something like hope, something like purpose. Later that afternoon, Sandra asked him to join her for a quiet walk. They moved through a calm park where leaves swayed softly in the wind. People walked by, but neither Keanu nor Sandra paid much attention. They walked slowly, letting the silence carry them. After a while, Sandra spoke. She said she knew he had been carrying too much alone. She said she wished he had talked to her sooner. Keanu looked at her and said he did not want to be a burden. She stopped walking and looked at him with firm eyes. She told him he was never a burden. She told him he had been there for her many times before, and she would always be there for him now. He felt the truth in her voice. He remembered all the times he had comforted her when she doubted herself. He remembered the quiet conversations they shared between scenes, the jokes that cleared stress, the gentle respect that formed their bond. He realized he had always trusted her, but he never allowed himself to rely on her. Now she was showing him it was safe to do that it was human to need support. That strength was not only about standing alone, but also about knowing when to accept a hand. As they continued walking, Sandra suddenly said she wanted him to meet someone. She told him there was a young director who believed in raw storytelling, someone who understood the beauty of simple emotions, someone who was excited to work on the project with them. She said the director was waiting at a nearby studio room. Keanu felt his heart tighten. This was real. This was happening. A real opportunity. A real beginning. He tried to keep his calm, but the emotions swirling inside him felt overwhelming. He was stepping into something new while carrying the pain of what he had lost. But he trusted Sandra, and he trusted her vision. When they entered the quiet studio room, the young director stood with nervous excitement. He greeted them with respect and gratitude. He told Keanu he had grown up watching him. He said his films had inspired him to choose this path. Keanu felt a wave of humility. Compliments usually felt uncomfortable to him, but this one reached somewhere deep. It reminded him that even when he felt forgotten, his work had touched many people quietly. Maybe he was not as invisible as he feared. They spent hours discussing the heart of the story. The themes were emotional and honest. It was about losing hope and finding it again through the kindness of one person. Keanu listened carefully because he understood the character in a way no script could explain. He understood the silence, the doubt, the quiet longing for meaning. Every word of the conversation felt like a small step toward healing. Sandra watched him with a soft smile, proud of how he carried himself even at his lowest. As the meeting ended, the director said something that stayed with Keanu long after the day ended. He told him that sometimes people fall simply because life wants them to stand up with a different kind of strength. The kind of strength that comes from being broken and rebuilt. Those words echoed inside Keanu's mind as he walked out of the studio with Sandra. He felt like he was standing at the start of something fragile yet beautiful. That evening, Keanu sat alone again, but this time the room did not feel empty. He felt Sandra's support around him like a warm light. He felt the director's belief in him like a fresh breath. He felt his own strength returning slowly. He knew the world had turned away from him, but he also knew he was not alone anymore. Sandra had become his anchor. She had become his reminder that he still mattered. And inside his heart a quiet promise formed. He would rise again, not for applause, not for fame, but for the truth inside him, and for the people who never left his side. The next days moved gently, but each one carried an invisible weight. Keanu woke early every morning and tried to rebuild his routine. He read the script Sandra had given him again and again. Every line felt close to his heart because the story was about a person who lost his place in the world and found it again through kindness. It felt almost like reading his own reflection. Sometimes he paused in the middle of a sentence because the emotions inside him rose too quickly. He would close the script and take a slow breath. Then he would start again. He wanted to give this story everything he had because it was not just a project. It was a chance to feel alive again. Sandra checked on him daily. Sometimes she sent him a message early in the morning asking if he slept well. Sometimes she arrived at his door with simple breakfast. Every time she looked at him, she could see how hard he was trying to rebuild himself quietly. She never pushed him. She only guided him with gentle words and steady warmth. Her support did something powerful. It made him feel safe to try, safe to fail, safe to learn again. He had been carrying so much fear, but now he felt the shape of that fear changing slowly. One afternoon, they met at the studio again to rehearse a scene. It was a small rehearsal room with plain walls and soft lighting. The young director was already waiting there with notes in his hand. He greeted them with excitement, but also with a kind of respect that made Keanu feel grounded. The scene they rehearsed was emotional and heavy. It showed the main character facing a moment where he felt invisible to the world. The director asked Keanu to sit on a wooden chair in the center of the room and simply breathe through the emotions. Keanu sat down and closed his eyes. At first he tried to follow the script exactly, but something inside him refused to stay quiet. The silence in the room brought a wave of memories, the rejections, the long nights, the quiet moments when he doubted his worth. He felt his hands tighten. He opened his eyes slowly and stared at the empty space in front of him. Sandra watched him from the corner, and she knew immediately that he was not acting now. He was feeling. The director noticed the change too and stepped back instead of interrupting. He let the emotion rise naturally. Keanu kept breathing deeply as the pain inside him surfaced. He whispered the lines, but his voice shook slightly. He spoke like someone who understood every word in his bones. The room stayed silent. No one moved. Keanu finished the scene and lowered his head. The room felt heavy but honest. Sandra walked closer and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. She did not speak because she knew he needed a moment to breathe. When he finally lifted his head, the director's eyes were wide with awe. He said he had never seen such raw emotion. He said the world needed to see this version of Keanu, the version that was human and real and full of quiet strength. Keanu did not know how to respond. He only nodded. He felt exposed but also strangely relieved. For the first time, he allowed himself to feel everything without hiding. He had spent months pretending to be fine. Now he was letting truth guide him. After the rehearsal, Sandra suggested they take a short break outside. They stepped into the open air where the wind moved softly between the trees. Keanu leaned against a wall and closed his eyes again. Sandra stood beside him and waited. Finally, he spoke. He told her he had not expected the emotions to hit him so strongly. He told her he felt embarrassed for losing control. Sandra shook her head gently. She told him he was not losing control. He was healing. She said sometimes healing looks like breaking for a moment, so something stronger can grow. Her words calmed him. He opened his eyes and looked at her. She held his gaze with soft warmth. She reminded him that the world might turn away sometimes, but that did not erase the truth inside him. She told him that he was allowed to feel pain. He was allowed to be tired, but he was not allowed to forget who he really was, and who he was had nothing to do with fame. He was a kind person with a quiet soul, and that was something far deeper than popularity. Later that evening, they returned to the studio for another meeting with the producers who were considering joining the project. Keanu felt nervous because these meetings usually tested his confidence. They walked into a glass room where three producers waited around a table. The producers greeted Sandra with warm smiles, but Keanu felt a familiar tension in their eyes. They respected him, but they seemed unsure about him being the lead again after so long. It reminded him of the old rejections, and his heartbeat quickened. The producers asked questions about the film and about Keanu's ability to handle the emotional weight. One of them spoke in a careful tone and said they were not sure if the audience still connected with him the same way. The words hit him deeply even though they were spoken politely. He lowered his eyes for a moment. Before he could speak, Sandra leaned forward. She did not raise her voice or act defensive. She spoke calmly and clearly. She said the project needed honesty more than glamour. She said Keanu carried honesty naturally. She told them he had more range and depth than most people realized, and she said she trusted him completely. The room fell silent for a moment. Her confidence was steady. Her belief in him was undeniable. The producers exchanged looks and nodded slowly. They agreed to trust her judgment. Before leaving the room, one of them said he hoped this project would surprise the world. Keanu felt something warm inside him, gratitude, relief, and admiration for Sandra. She defended him without hesitation. She stood by him when others questioned him. That kind of support was rare, and he knew it. As they walked out of the studio, Sandra smiled at him and asked if he was okay. He said he was, but inside he felt something much deeper. A shift, a rise, a quiet rebuilding. He felt stronger because she believed in him, and with every moment he spent beside her, he realized something new. She was not just helping him stand again. She was helping him see himself with clear eyes. That night, Keanu sat near his window again. The city lights blinked softly, but this time they did not look distant. They looked hopeful. He opened the script again and placed his hand on the first page. He whispered a promise to himself. He would give this story everything he had. He would rise again not because the world wanted him, but because he wanted to honor the people who stood beside him, especially Sandra. The world may have turned away from him, but she became his strength when he had none left. The next morning, Sandra arrived earlier than usual. She carried 2 warm coffees and a calm smile that softened the room the moment she stepped inside. Keanu looked tired but more focused than before. He had spent most of the night reading the script and writing small notes in the margins. There was a quiet intensity in his eyes now, the kind that appears when someone starts believing in themselves again, even if the belief is still fragile. Sandra noticed it instantly and felt a quiet relief in her heart. They sat at the table and went through the script together. Sandra explained how she imagined the emotional beats. She wanted every moment to feel real. She wanted the audience to see a man who had lost everything and still chose kindness. As she spoke, Keanu listened with full attention. He nodded at every detail. When he read his lines, he read them slowly, letting each word settle inside him. His voice carried a gentle truth that made the scenes feel alive even without cameras. After an hour of discussion, they walked to the rehearsal studio again. The director greeted them with excitement because he had watched the footage from yesterday's test shots. He said Keanu's eyes held a type of quiet pain that could not be taught. He said the scene felt honest and raw. Keanu felt embarrassed but grateful. He bowed his head slightly and said thank you. The director then handed them a new scene to practice. This scene was important because it showed the character hitting a low point before finding strength through a friend. As they rehearsed the scene, something unexpected happened. Sandra was playing the friend who helped the character stand again. When she delivered her lines, she did not simply act. She spoke with true emotion. She talked about how people forget that even strong souls need someone to remind them of their worth. She spoke about how everyone deserves someone who sees them when they cannot see themselves. As she spoke, Keanu felt his chest tighten because her words did not feel like acting. They felt like truth meant for him. The director watched with wide eyes because the chemistry between them felt real and powerful. Every pause, every breath, every glance carried emotion. The room felt heavy with meaning. When the scene ended, no one spoke for a moment. Keanu let out a slow breath and Sandra smiled softly. She did not need to ask how he felt. She could see it on his face. The scene had touched something deep inside him. The director said he felt chills watching them. He said moments like this were rare. After rehearsal, Sandra suggested they step outside for fresh air. They walked to a small bench behind the building where a quiet garden rested. Flowers swayed gently and birds moved through the branches above them. They sat together without speaking at first. Sandra finally broke the silence. She asked him how he felt about the scene. Keanu hesitated, then said he felt exposed. He said it reminded him too much of what he had been carrying for months. Sandra nodded, and told him that pain sometimes allows deeper truth to shape a performance. He looked at her and asked quietly why she believed in him so much. She smiled and said she had her reasons. She said he had always shown strength in silence. He had always shown patience in hardship. She said people like him did not fade. They evolve. She said she knew the world had been unfair to him, but she also knew he was still capable of greatness. Her words reached him in a way he could not fully explain. He felt seen. He felt understood. He felt valued. They continued talking until the afternoon sun touched the garden. Sandra shared stories about her own struggles. She told him how she once doubted herself deeply and how someone she trusted helped her rise again. She said she never forgot that kindness and now she was paying it forward. Keanu listened with respect. He realized she was not helping him out of duty but out of genuine care. She saw him as a friend who needed a hand, not as a fallen star. Later in the day, they returned to the studio for a meeting about the film schedule. Everything was coming together slowly, but they still needed a final approval from one more producer. This producer was strict and known for his serious approach. When he arrived in the meeting room, he looked at Keanu with a neutral expression. He asked about Keanu's readiness for a full emotional project. He said the film required vulnerability and stamina. Keanu answered honestly. He said he was ready to give everything he had. The producer studied his expression carefully. Then Sandra spoke. She said she had watched Keanu grow stronger every day. She said she had seen him push through difficult emotions with honesty. She said she trusted him with her whole heart. Her confidence struck the room with calm power. The producer remained silent for a moment, then finally nodded. He agreed to move forward. Keanu felt a wave of relief wash over him. Sandra gently tapped his arm and whispered that she told him everything would work out. After the meeting, they walked outside together. The evening sky was soft and warm. People walked along the street, but the world around Keanu felt quieter now. He turned to Sandra and told her he did not know how to thank her. She shook her head and said he did not need to thank her for believing in the truth. She said he simply needed to keep going. He nodded slowly. He felt something new inside him, something stronger than hope. He felt purpose growing again. That night, Keanu returned home and sat by the window just like he used to. But this time, he did not feel lost. He felt a gentle strength building in his chest. He opened his notebook and wrote down his thoughts. He wrote about fear. He wrote about gratitude. And he wrote about Sandra. He realized that sometimes life brings one person who holds the light for you when you cannot find it yourself. And Sandra was that person for him. As he closed the notebook, he looked out at the city lights and whispered something into the quiet room. He said he was ready to rebuild. He said he was not alone anymore. And he said he would make this film with all the truth inside him, for himself, and for the friend who stood beside him with unwavering faith. The following week marked the start of full rehearsals. The studio felt different now. The halls were quieter, the rooms warmer, and the atmosphere carried a sense of rebuilding. Keanu arrived early each day, long before anyone else showed up. He wanted to prepare his mind and steady his emotions before facing the scenes. He walked slowly across the rehearsal floor, feeling the softness of the wooden surface under his shoes. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply. He reminded himself that this was not a return fueled by pressure. This was a return fueled by heart. He was stepping back into his craft with honesty, not with fear. Sandra arrived shortly after him. She always greeted him with a gentle smile that carried calm energy. She noticed the quiet fire in his eyes and felt proud of how far he had come. They sat together and read through scenes again. Sometimes she corrected his tone. Sometimes he corrected a detail in her delivery. They worked as a team. The bond between them grew stronger every day. There was no ego, no competition, only trust and respect. As rehearsals deepened the story they were building grew heavier. The character Keanu played had a scene where he breaks down after being pushed aside by the world. The director wanted raw emotion. He wanted truth. He wanted the quiet kind of heartbreak that does not explode but sinks deep. Keanu understood this pain because he had lived it. When he performed the scene, he felt his chest tighten. The room went quiet as he dropped to his knees and whispered the lines with trembling breath. The team watched in silence. No one moved, no one blinked. When the scene ended, the director looked speechless. He said they had captured something real, something rare. But the emotional intensity drained Keanu more than he expected. After rehearsals, he walked outside with Sandra. His steps were slower than usual. She noticed his exhaustion and gently asked if he was all right. He nodded, but she could see the heaviness in his eyes. She told him to sit on a bench under a tree near the studio. He sat down, rested his hands on his knees, and looked at the ground. Sandra sat beside him quietly. She waited, giving him space to breathe. After a long moment, Keanu spoke softly. He said the scenes were pulling up old pain he thought he had already buried. He said sometimes it felt like he was standing at the edge again. Sandra listened with full attention. She told him it was natural. She said healing never moves in a straight line. She said progress sometimes feels like falling before rising again. She placed a gentle hand on his arm and told him she believed he was strong enough to carry these emotions without being crushed by them. Her words steadied him. He lifted his head slowly and looked at her. She held his gaze and said he was not alone. She said she was right there with him. He felt something warm spread in his chest. Her support became a grounding force that kept him centered even when his emotions shook him. He took a slow breath and thanked her. She smiled softly and said he did not need to thank her for caring. Over the next few days, Keanu continued rehearsing with growing confidence. Each scene felt easier to navigate because he began understanding something important. He realized the pain he carried was not a weakness. It was a strength. It allowed him to portray truth that most people never dared to touch. The director praised his work often. The team watched him with growing admiration. Whispers began spreading around the studio that Keanu was delivering the performance of his life. One afternoon, the main producer visited the set. He had heard the rumors about Keanu's work and came to see it for himself. He asked to watch a run-through of one of the most emotional scenes. The pressure in the room rose instantly. Keanu felt his heartbeat quicken as he stepped into position. Sandra noticed his nerves and moved closer. She whispered softly that he did not need to impress anyone. She said he only needed to tell the truth. He nodded slowly, letting her words calm him. The scene began. The lights dimmed softly. Keanu stood in the center of the room, breathing deeply. He delivered each line with quiet intensity. His voice cracked at the right moments. His eyes softened with controlled pain. Every part of the scene felt honest. The room held its breath as he delivered the final line. When he finished, the silence stayed for several seconds. No one spoke. No one even shifted in their seat. The producer finally exhaled and said he had not seen a performance like that in years. He said Keanu had something rare, something powerful. He said the world needed to see this side of him. Keanu bowed his head gently. He did not smile widely, but a calm pride warmed his expression. Sandra watched him with eyes full of quiet joy. She knew this was the moment he needed, a moment of recognition from someone who once doubted him. Later that evening, after everyone left the studio, Keanu stayed behind. He wanted a moment alone. He walked to the center of the room and looked around. He remembered how lost he felt just weeks ago. He remembered the silence of rejection. He remembered the heaviness in his chest when he believed he had nothing left to offer. Now the same room that once felt intimidating felt like a place of healing. He whispered to himself that he was not the same person anymore. He had grown. He had changed. He had found strength through struggle. Sandra returned quietly, noticing he had stayed behind. She stepped into the room and asked if he was all right. He nodded and said he just needed a moment to take everything in. She stood beside him and looked around the empty studio. Then she said something that anchored the moment. She said she always knew he would rise again. She said she always knew he had more to give. He turned to her with soft eyes. He thanked her again, but this time the gratitude ran deeper. She smiled and said she believed in him not because of his career, but because of his heart. She said he had a kindness that the world needed. Her words reached him like a gentle touch. He felt emotion rise, but he held it steady. He looked at her and told her something he had not said before. He said she was the reason he found his strength again. Sandra looked at him with quiet warmth. She placed her hand on his shoulder and said she was proud of him, and in that moment Keanu felt something he had not felt in months. He felt whole. The day of the first full camera test arrived sooner than anyone expected. The studio felt alive with soft activity. Lights were being adjusted. Equipment was being rolled across the floor. Quiet conversations filled the space. Everyone seemed focused, but there was a special kind of energy in the room. It was the energy that appears when people know they are building something meaningful. Keanu arrived with calm steps, but deep inside he felt a rush of nerves. This was the moment he had been preparing for. This was the moment that would show if all the pain, all the rebuilding, and all the trust he had placed in himself would finally lead somewhere new. Sandra walked toward him with a warm smile. She could see the uncertainty behind his calm expression. She handed him a warm drink and stood beside him. She said he did not need to be perfect. She said he just needed to be honest. He nodded slowly and took a deep breath. Her presence always steadied him. She had become his anchor in a world that often moved too fast. He whispered a soft thank you, and she gave a small nod, telling him without words that she was right there with him. The director called for the first scene. It was one of the most emotional moments in the entire film. The character stands alone after losing everything he once had. The world has turned away from him. The industry has forgotten him. He feels invisible. The scene required quiet strength and deep sorrow. The crew adjusted the lights as Keanu stepped into position. The room fell silent. Sandra watched from the side, her eyes gentle and full of belief. The camera started rolling. Keanu closed his eyes for a moment and allowed himself to feel everything. The fear, the doubt, the loneliness, the silent wounds he carried for months. When he opened his eyes, the emotion poured through naturally. He whispered the lines softly, almost like a confession. His voice cracked at the edges, but not in a dramatic way. It cracked with real human pain. He looked around the empty space as if searching for a sign that he still mattered. His expression held heartbreak, but also a quiet determination that refused to die. The director watched with awe. The crew forgot they were filming. Sandra felt tears forming in her eyes. She knew he was not acting. He was healing while performing. He was letting go of old wounds by turning them into art. When the scene ended, there was no applause. There was only silence, a deep, stunned silence. The director finally spoke softly. He said that the world had been waiting for this version of Keanu without even knowing it. Keanu lowered his head and breathed slowly. He felt drained but lighter. He looked up and saw Sandra walking toward him. She placed her hands gently on his arms and smiled with quiet pride. She told him he had done something extraordinary. He shook his head softly, unable to fully accept the praise, but she held his gaze and said she meant every word. He felt warmth spread through his chest. It was the warmth of being understood and accepted. The rest of the day went smoothly. Scene after scene flowed naturally. The director praised Keanu's work repeatedly. The crew whispered about how powerful the film was becoming. By evening, the producer called both Keanu and Sandra into his office. He told them he believed the film had the potential to touch millions. He said Keanu's performance was unlike anything he had seen in years. He looked at Keanu and said he hoped this project reminded him of his own worth. Keanu nodded respectfully, feeling an emotion he could not name. It felt like a quiet return to himself. Later, when the sun had set and the studio lights dimmed, Keanu and Sandra walked outside together. The cool night breeze brushed against their faces. The city lights glowed softly around them. They walked slowly toward the empty parking lot where their cars waited. Neither of them spoke at first. They simply let the moment breathe. Then Sandra stopped and turned toward him. She told him she had watched him break, rebuild, and rise again. She said she could not be more proud of him. She said he was proof that a person does not lose their worth just because the world forgets it for a while. She said he had shown courage in the quietest way. He looked at her with soft eyes. He knew her words were true because she had seen every part of his journey. She had seen him at his lowest. She had seen him doubt himself. She had seen him stand again. Keanu stepped closer and said something he had held inside for weeks. He told her she was the reason he survived this storm. He told her she gave him strength when he had none. He told her she reminded him of who he was when he almost forgot. Sandra listened quietly and her eyes softened. She placed her hand over his and said anyone would have helped him if they had the heart to see him clearly. But she was grateful she was the one who stood beside him. She said it was an honor to watch him rise again. They stood there for a long moment under the night sky. The world around them felt still. Keanu felt a sense of peace he had not felt in a long time. He realized something important. When the industry turned away, life gave him something better. It gave him a friend who believed in him more than he believed in himself. It gave him a person who held his heart steady when everything else was falling apart. The next day, the studio released a short behind-the-scenes clip of his performance. Within hours, people across the industry began talking about him again. Messages came from actors, directors, and old colleagues. They praised his depth. They praised his honesty. They said they could not wait to see the film. But for Keanu, the recognition did not matter as much as the truth he carried now. He knew his worth again, and he knew exactly who helped him find it. Sandra and Keanu stood side by side on the first official day of filming. The director called action. And as the scene began, Keanu felt something he had missed for a long time. He felt alive. He had fallen, he had broken, he had questioned everything. But in the end, he rose again. Not because the world wanted him, but because Sandra believed he still had light inside him. And sometimes that is all a person needs to stand again.